and welcome to a wonderful edition of the New Indian Express's Expressions. We have the inimitable Professor S.P. Roy with us. He's, as Dr. Ota describes him, he's the grand old man of, let's cut out the old, well, let's just say the grand man of tribal development and tribal studies in India. And we have Dr. Ota, who's the director of the Tribal Research Institute. And we're doing this on International Forest Day. So that's very significant because we thought we'll focus on tribals and their relationship to the forest. And there's been so much conversation around that on how the tribals relate to their forests and what they think of it. But there's not enough. There are not enough people, I think, who actually intimately lived with them, talked to them, and understand the diversity of the tribals and the diversity of the biodiversity. But both Professor Roy and Dr. Ota are people who really spent their lives with them. And I'd like to begin with Professor Roy and then go on to Dr. Ota. Professor Roy, at this moment, when we talk about tribals and forest development, what is the first thing that strikes you? You know, we think of the depletion of the forest cover as being the first thing, but as Dr. Ota was telling me, there has been an increase in the last 3 years. So we really don't know much about what's happening. Could you enlighten us?
Yes, thank you very much, Kaveri ma'am. This is on the day of World Forestry Day.
Yeah.
As internationally, it is recognized a very important day for the forest and sustainable development.
Right.
And we are taking tribe as one component.
Right.
When we talk of sustainable development, it is not for tribal alone. But today we are talking, while thinking about the sustainable development, role of the forest, how important is tribal contribution, tribal culture, and tribal development. So broadly, sustainable development and contribution of tribal in forest conservation for sustainable development and for tribal development also. This for tribal development also.
Right.
Yeah. So here we see globally, we are passing through some common problem which ever human history has witnessed, and that is climate change. It's a global problem, not for India, Pakistan, or Burma, or Russia, or America. All of us have one problem, climate change, which has shaken the humanity. Now, when you go for the understanding the climate change, which is one of the important issues of sustainable development, because unless we address climate change, we can't think of development.
Right.
So what are the cause for that? Unless we understand the cause, we can't address the issue. So it is now universally accepted 4 or 5 important causes. One of the important causes is that accumulation of carbon dioxide gas and other gases, which peaks in the human environment, and causes warmth. In addition to carbon dioxide, the gas like from the nitrogen use of chemical nitrous oxide, some methane, is a fuel. So all these gases, if these are not addressed to, we are not going to address the issue of sustainable development, climate change. Now, where from we can think of carbon dioxide, think removal of carbon, and we call it carbon sequestration. That means how the earth system, plant, sea, soil will absorb carbon and keep on the soil. That is carbon sequestration. Here, interestingly, the forest is a larger system which absorbs carbon for carbon sequestration. And then of the forest, the natural forest, which is more important for carbon sequestration. And another interesting thing, when we think that for carbon sequestration, natural forest is important, and natural forest, the territory is mostly inhabited directly or indirectly by indigenous tribal people. Another interesting, that means if you want to address the carbon sequestration, if you want to address the sustainable development, if you want to address the humanity as a whole, not tribal alone, humanity as a whole, so we have to think of the indigenous forest and indigenous community. This is the major point of our understanding. Maybe any scientist, but any kind of research, any Nobel laureate cannot ignore about the importance of biodiversity and indigenous people. So this is why we have thought of discussing what are the major factors which will be helping us for addressing the issue of climate change, sustainable development through indigenous tribe and the indigenous forest. This is globally. I will take two examples. Right. Globally, hardly there are 2% of the population of indigenous community. And more than 60% of the biodiversity is directly used or managed by these indigenous people. So you can understand how important are indigenous people who are indirectly managing or using the world's richest biodiversity, which is responsible for carbon sequestration, which is responsible for sustainable development for all of us. And in India also, I'm talking the globe, in India also, if you go through the data even from the Indian Express, for Indian Forest Survey, it is found that while there has been greening, increase in the forest, I repeat, there has been greening, increase in the forest cover, but the carbon sequestration has not been by all the forests. Very interesting. The carbon sequestration, which is responsible for carbon sink, which is responsible for climate change, which is responsible for sustainable development, is confined to, we call it, as per the government report, tribal district of indigenous forest. Not all forests. Tribal district of indigenous forest. Say, you have seen the report, it is published in the newspaper. Karnataka has more greening due to plantation, maybe 1,000 square kilometers. Andhra Pradesh is nearly more than 900. But the carbon sequestration has been less there.
Why is that? Why is that, Professor?
Yeah, why that? See, carbon sequestration is a process of biological activity.
Right.
Now, the biological activity will be functioning only when certain parts work together.
Okay.
Not just one part. I'll give you an example. If your heart has to work.
Right.
So the cell of the heart are different from the cell of your lungs or intestine.
Right.
Or your skin or muscle. So the carbon sequestration system is the interdependent certain biodiversity.
Right.
Not a single plant alone.
Right.
So when we do plantation, we have plantation of 1 or 2 species. But the functioning of the heart depends on the number of interdependent species which form the forest ecosystem.
Right.
So in order to conserve that natural forest ecosystem, which is remotely still surviving with indigenous people, where we have not removed those rare species, those threatened species, those keynote species. So all these species interact together to function as a forest ecosystem.
Right.
So not a single tree, you may have thousands of miles of plantation, but that is not the ecosystem. Ecosystem has some plants and trees which form the interdependent part.
Right.
And the indigenous people, they understand which part they have to remove, which is not, because they consider themselves as a part of the system.
But they sorry,
do not consider themselves as a manager, whereas a forester will consider not a part of the forest ecosystem. he will consider as a manager. So you can understand the difference between the approach and the knowledge. If you are becoming a part of your heart, you will work differently. And the surgeon who will be operating your heart will be looking heart from differently. So the indigenous people they consider themselves they're part of their ecosystem, their knowledge, their belief. They connect their ancestor with the trees and wildlife, the totem relationship, the origin. That is why they consider the forest ecosystem as a cosmological relationship, not a kind of mechanical relationship. Their spirit, their culture is interconnected with a tree and species. So the whole approach of understanding ecosystem is different of the indigenous community than a forest manager.
Why have we not been able to transfer the tribal model of the relationship with nature and biodiversity to non-tribal communities?
That's very interesting. I'm very happy to share that the government of India, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, with the approaches of the Forest Rights Act, has been trying to understand. First, we have to understand the tribal culture, which helps in conservation.
Exactly. Then we can replicate.
Then only can replicate. You are right.
Yeah, right.
So this approach of the ministry to understand through the forest resource conservation. One is the forest can be used by tree, but what is the natural forest resource as a whole system that comes under FRA by the government of India through Ministry of Tribal Affairs, and this has been linked with the Biological Diversity Act 2002,
right,
where it is mentioned under section 41 that the knowledge of the community, this is as a part of the patent, it should be recognized and it should be registered, and it has to be seen as a part of the whole forest ecosystem. It's not only the forest alone, it's for all biodiversity. That is why the initiation by the government of India through Biological Diversity Act to prepare PBR, People's Biodiversity Register. This PBR is one of the instruments through which indigenous knowledge will be recorded. The rare species, the other species will be recorded over there, so that while conservation continue, they can also have economy and livelihood. Right. So these are the two important acts of the government of India. One is Biological Diversity Act 2002. One is FRA 2006. So these are the approaches and means. But of course, we'll discuss the challenges in implementation of these two. But this is a good beginning. We must appreciate this is a good beginning from the government of India. Right. And this is why this is recognized by United Nations also in their Article 33. You ask about the India, why the model is not replicated. Even the United Nations Article 33, they have referred the indigenous knowledge which favors conservation should be replicated and should be encouraged. That is the Article 33. And there's another act under CBD, Convention of Biological Diversity. There, Article 8J, it is mentioned very categorically that indigenous people should be made partner in the conservation planning, and their benefits should be taken care on the priority. And very interestingly, I also like it, I also repeat it, we should not consider tribal as beneficiary. I told you earlier also. Right. We are beneficiary if they conserve. So the whole of our approach that as if we are doing some mercy or providing dole to the tribal, we should not. We have to make them as a partner use their indigenous knowledge for their own survival and the survival of the humanity as a whole.
Right. Dr. Ota, may I bring you in here? Because as director of the Tribal Research Institute in Odisha, you're it's one of the 27 TRIs in the country. And this is the work that TRIs are doing. And you were telling me recently of how TRI Odisha is actually helped in locating 600 springs all over Odisha, which is fascinating. And the government had promised that it would locate 1,000 springs nationwide. 600 have already been located in Odisha thanks to tapping the indigenous knowledge of tribals. Can we talk a little about these wonderful best practices that need to be showcased and in a way brought into the national discourse?
Certainly, thank you so much. Taking cue from what Professor Roy said, I'm just going ahead. Well, my research institute is the oldest of all the tribal research institutes of the country.
Okay, when was it set up?
It was set up in 1952.
The first way, yeah.
Right.
I must tell you what our TRI is doing and what many other TRIs are doing differently. You see, just two best practices, I should say, why even a couple of more practices I will also say, to see that the Forest Right Act and forest diversity, the forest is protected, what all steps we have taken. One thing I'll tell you, forest cannot be seen in isolation.
Right.
A plantation of trees cannot be seen in isolation, or a tree which provides oxygen to you will also not be taken in isolation.
Right.
What we have been doing, let me tell you. First of all, you see, when in 2006 the Forest Right Act got promulgated, and in 2007 December, the rules also, were announced by Government of India. It's a central act. What we did, we tried to. It's a very, very new act. It promises a lot of things, but you have to convince the tribals. You have to win their heart. You have to make them understand. Otherwise, they're very culture bound. They won't listen to you. So what we did, in TRI Odisha, we translated the important, part, the operational part of the act and its objective in 21 tribal languages. We hold a number of, capacity building training program on site among the communities. We also built, the frontline community workers who can take it forward. You see, when a new act came, there was also all the officers who are to implement it also were not in the same page. We even brought all kinds of stakeholders and we provided them training program. We prepared, in collaboration with UNDP, an interactive, CD, which was extremely helpful in understanding how to take it forward, how to apply for the claims, how to scrutinize it, and how to get it approved, not only with the, keeping at the back of the mind that you have to reject the cases. So that, paved the way. And you see, Odisha that is why the leader in the entire country in terms of, giving more than 4.75 lakhs of individual forest titles so far.
Right.
Next important thing is that only forest right is not going to help you. Only plantation is not going to help you. They have to exist. You are giving a piece of land in the name of the tribal which they have been tilling for ages. But it has to be made productive. For productive, you need water sources. What we found in Tribal Research Institute, that there are so many perennial streams,
right,
or springs, you can say, which has a great potential. If that can be tapped, probably irrigation can be made available by the tribal themselves. It can serve their agriculture purpose. It can give them more productivity in their land. The forest land, which is given in the name of tribals under the FRA, can be meaningfully used to source their livelihood. Apart from that, it can also provide them water for drinking, which is very scarce in hilltops. So the mission which was started by Ministry of Tribal Affairs for 1,000 Spring Initiative has now touched about 300, you see, by ministry at various places. But what we did in TRI, we have identified, the report of which will be available by end of April, 620 or 25, I don't remember correctly, we have identified springs. Once we give that, to government of Odisha, I think in phases, those, springs can be tapped and it can be channelized for irrigation purpose. Okay. Second important thing you must remember, a lot of forest fire takes place. You see, you plant and you see on the other hand, forest fire. So we submitted a project to the Ministry of Tribal Affairs and we have taken 2 states, one Madhya Pradesh and the other Odisha, 10 districts. Here 5 districts and in Madhya Pradesh 5 districts. And in collaboration with IIFM Bhopal, we are undertaking a study to know the dynamics as to why forest fire is happening. Because unless you take care of the forest fire, you understand why it is happening. Is there a cultural reason? Is there a reason, which is caused for some other thing? So one has to find out. And ministry has given us the mandate that will come up on the basis of the finding a framework which will be used and shared by the ministry to all other states so that this forest fire can be combated. These are some of the things, you see, just to give you an indication which TRI Odisha is doing, which will probably help a lot in addressing this issue.
Right. Professor Roy, this is just one institute. I mean, there are, as we said, 26 others, and there's the work that institutions like you are doing. So really what, as you said, there needs to be a national framework. There needs to be a national repository of all this wisdom so that we can all share from each other. How does one do that?
2 approaches which has been universally asked for. The first is, instead of planning for individual some plants as a quick buck, making it in the name of greening, one has to understand the ecosystem as a whole, landscape. And this decade, 10 year, is considered as a decade of ecosystem restoration by United Nations. India is also one of the signatories. So the approach will be identify the landscape as a whole, where the nature and the culture of the community, it should be compatible. I repeat, nature. When we say nature, the land, biodiversity, water, livestock, the wildlife, all these natural ecosystem with the culture of the community. That means how community see, perceive natural phenomenon,
right,
as a entity of coexistence. And this has been designed by EE138 and has been now sponsored by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs to identify the ecosystem in Chhattisgarh and also in Odisha. And with a broad approach, we have taken 3 more states like West Bengal, Jharkhand, and now we'll be taking for the Northeast also Tripura and Assam. So the approach is ecosystem, not individual. Number two, for making the compatibility of the culture. See, culture is a continuous process. It is never static. It keeps on changing. So while culture keep on changing, one can facilitate those cultural behavior which favors conservation.
Right.
And it is not possible just by framing act and rule. We have to change the cultural ethos of the organization, of the community. Here, community, when I say, not alone tribal, because the tribal will be interacting with the non-tribal in the same landscape. So this will help tribal if we build capacity while they are conserving the natural resources, forest and livelihood. We recognize their culture and practices and also work together with the non-tribal who will respect tribal culture and work together. So this will be one of the approach of mainstreaming of the tribal and respecting their culture. I repeat here, mainstreaming is while you identify the uniqueness of their culture, make use of it, respect it, so that the tribal do not consider as a kind of inferior to anyone.
Right.
So that is the mainstreaming. And the third part of this, that do not plan for a single activity like agriculture or fishery. There are 9 activities which has been designed by IRAD, and all those 9 activities are interdependent. And we call it Navratan, because each Ratan is important for the community. I tell the first Ratan for the tribal or anyone that near their household land, homestead, we have to start organic vegetable, organic kitchen garden.
Right.
So immediately there'll be reduction on the pressure for going to forest, because if you find something immediately around their hut. So this is one. And then drip irrigation, which is the minimum use of water, because most of this tribal area, they suffer from the water scarcity because of depletion, drying up. So, and it's not very expensive. So drip irrigation, drop by drop, it enriches. And then come for any agriculture. Here in agriculture, what we have it done, and the ministry has also appreciated, even the ICR, Indian Council, they have appreciated to use the indigenous seed like millet, maize, pulses, those pulses which has got a value of nitrogen fixation. The soil improves.
Right.
Yeah. And then go for organic, vermicompost, other thing. With the water conservation comes the fishery. And then agroforestry. Agroforestry, where some of the plant combination works better. Which plant will go with that? So agroforestry will help our economic, soil conservation, and also, very interestingly, the topic which I was saying about the carbon sequestration. There are certain combination of plant which go better with that. And then comes for fodder for livestock. Because when we talk of the livestock, and if you do not plant for the fodder, it cannot be there. So all these 9 has to be in place. What happens, Dr. OTA will appreciate, he will tell, what happens, each sector, say agriculture department, they will beat their own drum of agri-crop. Fishery will come someday and talk of the fishery. Water people will come someday talk. Forest will talk. So each one will play their instrument differently. So there is no orchestra. So the harmony is not there. So what is now planned for convergence of all these resources, work together, identify the landscape, what is appropriate for cultivation, and this is conservation with the convergence of all the sectoral resources and harmonizing through micro planning, through people's participation. And this is very, very important. Dr. Kota will appreciate about the convergence of resources for sustainable tribal development, which will have a good for the livelihood, biodiversity, and the health of the forest also, and health of the community also.
Right. Dr. Ota, you want to take it from there?
Yeah. You see, Professor Rai told something. Let me just tell you. In fact, TRI Odisha and IBRAD, we are doing together a good work. He spoke about convergence. You know, right from first plan period, if you see, till 12th plan period and beyond, even during Niti Ayog's regime, there have been different kinds of tribal development strategies. Fund has been flowing. There's no dearth of fund, you know, for tribal development. But if you see, while tribal development has happened, some, you know, key human development indicators have considerably improved. Yet the pace of tribal development has been very slow. So what we and IBRAD together gave a proposal to the ministry that somewhere something is going wrong and probably there is a need for convergence. Often, same work is being done by X department and the same department is done by the Y department. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Often, I'm not saying, you know, there's a practice. So we thought that we'll try to find out how convergence can be taken as an approach with a, you know, defined modality so that the fund can be spent, yet the benefits can accrue to the tribals more sustainably. So that is what we are aiming at. Having said that, I will tell you one thing. This conservation cum development, CCD approach, they say, this was for the first time because, you know, every 5 years, Government of India Planning Commission will think that let us take stock of tribal development and will say that tribal development has not happened at the pace at which it was to happen. So they will come up with a different kind of strategy. In 2009, a different approach was propagated. What is that approach? Conservation cum development. So this conservation cum development became the approach, of government. It has paid off. It basically tried to see how development can happen without infringing upon the culture of tribal too much, and also trying to learn from the tribal culture and try to see if that can fit in or integrated with other kinds of development approaches that we have. In this regard, I will tell you one instance. UNESCO has been identifying intangible cultural heritages.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. The other day we met, Eric, the country head of UNESCO, and we were discussing. There is one particular, traditional heritage agricultural system, which is called as THAS, THAS. One of the best examples you find amongst two tribal communities of Odisha. One is the Bunda. You must have heard about Bunda Highlanders.
Right.
And the other one is Saura, another, tribal community who is also a PVTJ. What they do, they do very beautiful kind of stone bunding to, see that the soil and water management is done in the best possible manner. Soil erosion doesn't take place. It is arrested. And the water also, how very carefully it can be used so that it can spread over, more, extent of land. And it is a very, very good practice. UNESCO also have seen that and have taken cognizance of it. So if such, indigenous practices, which has a replicability and which can also enhance the opportunity for sustainable livelihood should also be tried more and more, and it can be expanded more and more in tribal areas. One thing you asked, which probably Professor Rai, because he has told so many things, missed out. You said that so many good things are done, whether we are trying to put it in a repository.
Yeah, a nationwide repository.
Yes, I tell you, Minister of Tribal Affairs have done a national, tribal document repository, where not only the documents which 37, center of excellences like Professor Roy's, institute, 27 TRIs, and many other agencies are doing. They are, keeping it in dedicated portal. That portal is not only, consists of reports, it also consists of video clippings.
Right.
It also consists of photographs, and it also consists of process documentation, so that one can easily follow how to adopt it.
Right. Wonderful. Professor Roy and Dr. OTA, just last thoughts on the centrality of forests in the tribal life, and what we can do to continue to maintain that centrality in the given situation with the kind of development that we see taking place, and to respect that centrality.
One thing that we all human use our intelligence, knowledge.
Right.
This is universal for the tribal, non-tribal group.
Right.
We all are also guided and conditioned our thought with our belief system. And the belief system is more powerful in governing my mindset and controlling my action. The tribal belief system is more akin to their ancestral practices, where they relate with the totem. They relate with the spiritualism. And such kind of a notion has given the birth of a good product, I will call it product, sacred grove. The sacred grove in most tribal villages are some of the species which are conserved together, and they believe some deity is there. They worship it. Such kind of a sacred grove, almost all part of the country, but Meghalaya and other part have been studied by many biologists. We too have studied. In Meghalaya, nearly 125 sacred groves, and more than 500 species are conserved. It's a magnificent effort of the tribal that conservation of such species is not only important just as a number of trees, but these sacred groves work as a pivot for ecosystem maintenance of the entire landscape.
Right.
So this is very, very important approach of the tribal. What we should think of, documentation has been done, but the replication of such sacred group needs to be done in a more scientific, social, and political also.
Right.
When I say political, means a political will to promote sacred grove, respect sacred grove. This has not been done more in the form of the political will, respecting, making an agenda of sacred grove.
Right.
And I tell you, such kind of sacred grove may not be in the form of the way tribal does, but in most all religion, even Hindus, worshiping of people.
Yeah.
Tulsi.
Yeah, exactly.
And, yeah. So these kind of promotion will help in biodiversity, and such sacred group have been playing a very powerful role in enriching the soil quality of the neighboring area. So if that soil quality improves, it will also improve the agriculture production. It will also improve the number of birds and insect which are important pollinators of the nature. So this kind of approach is one which we have been also trying. And the second one, as it happens, ma'am, each society is having a younger generation.
Right.
And each younger generation may not like to follow what their ancestors have been doing. It
Right.
happens in the tribal also.
Right.
And they sometimes come at the crossroad because of their exposure, because of their education, because education has been promoted by the government. We want school colleges.
Right.
Now, when they go for school and colleges, we can't expect them. They will remain in the village
Yeah.
and go for sacred group or conservation. They
Right.
will look for some opportunity. So for them, some kind of ecological economic career. I am very fond of using these two terms because unless ecology is sustainable, tomorrow economy will be weakened. So this has to be linked together. For them, the strategy, a kind of career or the ecological economic may be in the name of farmers producer organization, medicinal plant,
Yeah.
which is coming up,
Right.
and also for the livestock, a career plan on that.
Right.
So this will go. And the last point for promotion, women empowerment. I
Right.
have seen most of the tribal women are more action oriented, proactive, come
Right.
forward to take responsibility and deliver. So although there have been number of programs for women opportunity, women education, but from the conservation point of view, where sustainability, they take the back seat, although they are the main actor.
Yeah.
So how we link with them for the ecological economic? I use the term ecological economic. So whenever you think of any economy, say school teacher, so the teacher will understand whether the water is there or not, or the biodiversity is there or not, because they
Right.
have food, what kind of food we are taking. So even taking what kind of food is there. And finally, the indigenous seed. Even for millet and kodo, this flax, tisi, alsi, and other crop which is coming in the tribal area, this does not require a lot of water for cultivation. And it is pest resistant. So it does not require also lot of pesticide. So we should promote. And now all the nutrition, the experts are promoting this kind of food. So we can have a seed bank for indigenous seed, which will be helping in multiple ways. Because if the tribal understand it has got a future, so they will not go for rice and wheat growing, and they will not go for buying chemical fertilizer. If they understand it, the value. So how to have an indigenous knowledge? Even the millet is being promoted export. So the quality is also being sought. So all these things should be not in isolation. It should be a package for the landscape approach for tribal development. And again, I say it's not the tribal development, it's a development of the ecosystem, development of the society as a whole, development of you, ma'am, Kaveri and SP Roy and OTA, development for our survival. We have to care for the tribal development.
Right.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Last thoughts, Dr. Ota?
Kaveri ma'am, I will only tell you that there are acts and policies, but unless and otherwise, Professor Roy spoke about the youths and also the old generation, the gap and all that. The forest, it is a fact that there's a symbiotic relationship between forest and the tribals.
Right.
Correct. But then, the forest cannot survive sustainably without the help of the tribals,
Right.
without policing that, without nurturing it, and without properly, harnessing it. One thing I will tell you, unless and otherwise, the forest becomes a very sustainable source of livelihood and lucrative source of livelihood for the youths. The tribals, the young tribals are not going to, stick to the forest.
Right.
They will look for various avenues which they should look for. But, to make it sustainable, I think we must try to make the forest a very good source of earning, yet without, losing the density of the forest and the coverage of the forest. Look at the Forest Rights Act. It promises everything what Professor Roy said and what I'm going to tell you.
Right.
We have individual forest right. It doesn't say that you undo the century-long injustice and only give them, they settle the land in their favor. No, you must have to ensure that it becomes productive. Most important part, which is not done so far, or which is very seldom implemented in terms of Forest Right Act, is the community forest rights. Community forest right is very slow starter. Once community forest right is done and it is properly managed with a clearly defined mechanism, it can give a lot of source of earning. And last, which is a non-starter, so far as the Forest Right Act is concerned, is the habitat right for the PBTGs. It is a non-starter in the entire country. Odisha is the only state which has identified, filed in all cases, the habitat right, and probably we are going to give the habitat right in about 6 months' time to the PBTGs.
Right.
Last important thing, only, forest productivity, minor forest producers is not going to give, livelihood support to the tribals and also, a win-win situation for the forest and tribals. We have to have, proper system in place for the minimum support price for the minor forest produce. Though it is a scheme, it is not a very successful scheme. There are about 102 minor forest producers types. Only for 20 or 25, the minimum support price is provided. That too, it is not being handled, the way it should have. And in tribal areas, MFPs are perishable. There are many kind of, MFPs which are perishable.
Right.
We don't have, a storeyard. We don't have, processing unit in tribal areas. We don't have cold storage to keep. I think all these things are also need to be supported to encourage the tribals and to see that they get, decent earning from that, so that they will take care of the forest survives, and the tribal survives.
And we survive.
And we survive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Roy. Thank you very much, Dr. OTA. It was really a wonderful discussion, and on a very important day, the World Forest Day. Thank you very much, and all the best to all the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.